Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're continuing our unit here in Economic and Personal Finance. We're in Unit 6. This is on money management. We're going to talk about basically the most expensive thing you're going to spend money on throughout your entire life, and that is housing. And renting, leasing, owning, and different type of mortgages and what mortgages are. We're going to talk about all that today, so let's go ahead and get started. So everybody needs a place to live. Well, having a place to live is very expensive. If you're finishing high school, most likely you've lived with your parents most of your life, and you haven't had to pay rent or pay a mortgage or sign any contracts, depending on your situation. However, you're going to have to start. So learning about the different types of housing is really important because it is going to be most likely the largest chunk of your disposable income, of your paycheck, is going to go to where you live. All right, and it's going to dictate a lot of other aspects of your life. So let's start out by talking about renting. So renting is probably one of the most common ways of getting your first home, is renting. So the reason that is because renting is very accessible to people. It's very flexible. So if you go off to college and you don't live in the dorms, but living in the dorms is a type of renting. You're like renting a room there. Like renting an apartment. You go in and you say, hey, I want to pay month to month while I live here. I want to pay rent. Renting is very accessible to everybody. So renting is usually most people's first experiences with paying for a home. There are definitely some benefits to renting. There is flexibility. You can live in a place for a year, 6 months, a year, depending on what your rental contract is. And then you can just move to another place and rent somewhere else if you find a better deal or it's in a better location or you make more money and you want to get a nicer place. That is a huge benefit of renting. If you're not sure if you want to live in the same city or town for any long period of time, renting is a good option. You also don't really have to do a lot of maintenance. If something breaks, typically the landlord, whoever actually owns the property, is in charge of fixing that. You have a pipe that leaks, they fix it. The toilet breaks, they fix it. Shower's not working right, they fix it. You have an electrical problem, they fix it. That's not your expense. All you do is pay rent. So that is an absolute benefit of renting. Is not a ton of responsibility on upkeep and is a lot of flexibility. You can move. Now, there are definitely some downsides to renting. Some of the downsides to renting is the fact that your landlord can pretty much raise your rent whenever they want after a certain amount of time. Say you sign a 1-year lease, and we'll talk about leasing as opposed to renting, but basically from month to month. If you're just renting, I don't want to confuse renting and leasing. Those are two different things, even though sometimes they get used interchangeably. If you're renting month to month, your landlord can just change the rent prices. If you don't like that rent price, you can just leave and go rent somewhere else. So that is a downside. You don't have a lot of control over that. And rent is not cheap. To have the amenities of having somebody take care of any household issues that arise in a normal household. Dishwasher stops working, the landlord fixes or replaces it. That comes at a premium, and rent is not cheap. But it is, again, the most common and effective way of getting your foot in the door with getting your first home. There is also rent and security deposits. All right, so renting and security deposits are usually, it's like the first and last month of the rent is due when you start renting. So first month, last month, those are usually due at the start. So like if you're going to rent, it's not that you sign a piece of paper and cool, you get to live there for a month and then you pay money. So say it's $1,000 a month, and that seems like a lot of money. That's a pretty standard number to start out with here. And if it's anything more than like a 1-bedroom and it's in any type of city, it's going to be considerably more than $1,000 a month. So if it's $1,000 a month, you would have to have like $2,000 that you have to give them in advance. That covers your first month that you're getting ready to stay and your last month. Landlords aren't dumb. They usually know when people are about to dip out, they're like, I'm just not going to pay my rent. What are they going to do? Kick me out? So that's why you have to pay your last month's rent up front so that whenever you leave, your last month is already covered. And that way they're not stuck with having a property they didn't make any income on for the last month. So if it's a $2,000 a month rent, you would have to have $2,000 up front to move in addition to a security deposit, which means you can't go punch holes in the wall and stuff. That could be like an additional $1,000 that they're going to hold on to. So it could be $3,000 just to move into an apartment. And now the security deposit, in theory, as long as you don't do anything stupid, you should get that security deposit back. So the question here is, what is one benefit and one drawback of renting? I also want to point out, very importantly here, one of the drawbacks to renting is you don't own anything. Which, duh, we talked about that, Mr. Wagstaff. But when you own things, you increase equity. Equity is basically the amount of profit that you have as you pay down. Like, you live in a place that you rent. You can't sell that building that you're renting and then make a profit off of it when you leave. That's called equity. You're not gaining equity in renting. You are not owning anything. You're not working towards anything. You are just spending money to have a place to stay at that time. So you don't get any benefits from it after you leave. But pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, so leasing, I need to be very clear here because a lot of times, like you rent something and you go sign a lease agreement, they can kind of overlap. So I want to be very clear here. Renting, for the context here, we're just talking about paying month to month to month. All right, and you can leave at any point. Usually when you rent, you show up to rent a property and they make you sign a lease for a year, basically just saying you promise that you're going to live there at least a year. And then after that year is up, it's just month to month and you can leave at any point. So a lot of times in the real world, leasing and renting overlap, but there is some differences technically. So renting in theory is a month to month thing. It's very short term. And you can have any type of rental contracts that you want. But so for renting, as the definition goes, it is technically a month to month to month to month thing. But a lot of times in the real world, you go sign a rental agreement. It's called a lease agreement. And you're stuck for at least a year at a location. Sometimes 6 months, depending on however it's designed. So technically renting is just month to month. Lease is where you sign a contract. Leasing, like if you're going to officially, like I'm going to go lease something and that's like the terms you're using, you're expecting to stay there for a good time. And a lot of time, like lease options are like 1 to 3 years. Now, leasing has some different variables on it. All right. So leasing, not only is it usually longer term, which can be beneficial, usually the longer term that a contract is the lower the cost is, because whoever owns the property can guarantee some income during that time period, which that financial stability usually gets passed on to the leasee or the renter, in which they are allowed to pay a lower amount of rent every month towards their lease. So here's some different variables of leasing though that are not part of renting. You can have the option to purchase. Sometimes, say it's a house, and these don't come around real often, but they do exist. Say there's a house, you're like, man, I think I want to live here. I'm not really sure. I don't want to like lock into like 30 years at this house. So sometimes there's an option to purchase. So you sign a lease for 6 months to a year, and you can live in this house for 6 months to a year, then decide at the end of that, do I want to purchase the house? That is an option to purchase a lease. All right. A lease option is really commonly what gets overlapped with renting, which is, hey, I want to rent this property. And like, all right, sign a 1-year lease to promise that you're going to rent it for at least a year. And then once that lease is up, you still get to live there. Then it's just 1 month. Then it's each month. And if you want to leave, you can leave anytime that you want. The reason that is very common in renting is landlords, people who own the property, it takes a long time to get new tenants in. Sometimes it can take multiple months as you clean up a house from a previous tenant for somebody else going in. And this way it prevents it from happening every 2 months, and then most of the time the house is just being cleaned and being renovated as opposed to actually having a tenant in there. So that's why lease options a lot of times like coincide with renting, just to get people in there at least initially for a certain amount of time, and then after that it's month by month. So that's where the lease option and renting a lot of times will overlap, but the lease is a contract saying you have to stay there for a certain amount of time. Lease purchase agreement. This is like a lease to own, all right? So basically what this means is that you are leasing it. You've already agreed on that you're going to buy it. You're going to lease it for a certain amount of time, and as you are living there, you are getting ready to buy it. The lease to own, I don't really know a situation why that would be beneficial to somebody, because you're obligated to buy it. You have to buy it. But you're not owning it for like 1 to 3 years leading up to purchasing it. So the lease to own agreement is a little unique. Sometimes that can be used, you're paying rent, but it's supposed to be paying down the final cost that you're going to buy the house for. But like a lease purchase agreement is a lease to own, very uncommon in that. Typically when you lease something, it is, and a lot of times leasing is higher end properties. That you also see this like a lease agreement. Like if you're going to you're a famous rapper and you're going to lease a mansion in Beverly Hills. Sometimes those leases come because the house is fully furnished and you're leasing the entire property and you can't make any changes. So if you lease something, changes are not really an option. Especially at that level, because a lot of times leasing at the super high end, and you see there's a lot of commercial buildings as well, it'll come fully furnished, but you don't actually own anything that's there, and therefore you can't change anything. All right, so we mentioned security deposits. Same thing with renting, all right? You have a security deposit. So here's times when you paid all that money up front when you moved in, and then your landlord, after you move out, it's like, we're not giving you that lease deposit back. Here's the legal ways they can keep your security deposit. If you terminate your lease early, if you signed a contract saying you're going to live there for 3 years and you leave after 2 years, you're not getting that deposit back. Abnormal cleaning cost. If somebody's just come in and rub poop all over the floors or something crazy like that, or, and this is very common, if people smoke in the house and they have to come through and like steam clean all the carpets and paint all the walls because everything's dingy because people were smoking in the house, that you're going to lose your security deposit because that money goes to cleaning. If you didn't pay rent, if you got behind on your rent and they had to foreclose, or not foreclose, but they had to evict you and kick you out, that is a reason you're not going to get your security deposit back. Unpaid utilities. The utilities are a lot of times your responsibility in a rental house. So heat, air conditioning, you still have to pay your utilities. If you don't and you move out and then all of a sudden the utility company tells the landlord, hey, this house hasn't paid, your security deposit will cover the unpaid utilities. And damage. People came over and punched holes in the wall. Obviously, that has to be repaired, and the landlord has to hire a professional to do that, and you won't get your security deposit back for that. All right, so the question here is, what is one benefit and one drawback of leasing? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, let's talk about owning. You're going from leasing to buying. If you're going to buy a property, all right, there are pros and cons, and there's a lot of pros and cons to this. All right, this is putting on your big boy or big girl pants and adulting, very much so. Not that adulting isn't leasing or renting, but when you own a house, it is break out those white New Balances and get your lawnmower ready, because all that maintenance, that's on you. All right, which, as somebody who owns their house, I thoroughly enjoy having the responsibility of owning my house. Other people don't. There's not a one direct way or correct way of providing for a house. But Buying a house is really good if you plan on staying in the same area for a long time. It is by far, if you plan on staying there, all right, for 10 plus years, buying is the absolute best option for a variety of reasons. You are building equity. So if you own a house, you're going to get a mortgage, and we're going to talk about that. As you get a mortgage, you're paying it down, and you are basically paying yourself, because if you ever sell the house, you get all the extra profit of the money you've paid down. Downsides of buying a house is all the maintenance is on you. Sink breaks, dishwasher breaks, garage door doesn't work, that's on you. This is where you go to YouTube and you start figuring out, hey, is this something I can do myself? And then you're like, nope, let me hire a professional. And there's tons of professionals that can come out and fix these things, but that is a cost that gets incurred on you. There's nobody coming to help. If something happens, it's on you to have your insurance, your property taxes. That is a downside to it. One of the biggest pluses is it's your space. You own it, all right? You want to go paint a room neon orange, feel free. You want to customize it, you want to do whatever you want, you want to put in a second driveway, have at it. These things are, you want to put a fence in, you want to get a dog, you want to get, you want to get a zebra, keep it in your house. Cool, it's your house. You can do whatever you want to with it. Those types of things are not allowed if you're renting or leasing. So, how do you buy a house? Houses can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. How do you get the money? Well, you get a loan from a bank to buy the house. So the loan to buy a house has a specific name called a mortgage. So a mortgage, that is the amount of money that you have to pay the bank back for the house, plus the interest. A lot of times property tax will get averaged in there, so you have the same, like all of that gets put together in one monthly payment that you have to pay back to the bank. So, mortgage down payment. This is a big aspect of owning a home. And let's look mainly at the conventional loans here. The standard down payment for a house is 20%. So if you buy a $200,000 house, you go to the bank, you need to have 20% down payment. That's the standard. That's your golden if you have 20. That would be $40,000. So this is why we talked about yesterday, your financial plan, saving that money up. So you give to the bank. So you're already starting $40,000 in. So you take a loan out for $160,000. The reason that's important is you don't have to have extra insurance on your loan because you put down 20% down payment. If you have less than that and they still give you the loan, you have an extra fee you have to pay every month just in case you don't make your payments. Then the banks don't lose this extra money. So they have to take out an insurance policy on your loan and you pay the premiums for that. However, the whole point here, so say you put that 20% down, that's $40,000. All right. Let me stick with what I actually put on the screen here. Say you buy a house for $250,000, all right, and you put down a down payment of $17,500. All right. That's well less than 20%, but that's what you put down. So your mortgage, so since you put down a much down payment, you don't have to take a loan out for all of that. All you need to take a loan out for is $232,500, which is the difference, all right, because you put that towards the house. That means you already have an equity of $17,500. Meaning, all right, if you turned around the next day and sold that house and you sold it for the same thing you bought it for, $250,000, you would get to keep that $17,500 and then all the extra money goes back to the bank, all right? So equity is basically the amount of money you've paid off on your house. That's your profit you get to keep. So after 10 years, all right, that same house, and you've been paying on your principal. You originally owed $250. You gave out, $17,500. After 10 years, you still owe $186,000, $208 left on the house. If you sold it for $250,000. You would profit $63,000. So basically, instead of paying rent to like a landlord, that money basically goes into equity, all right? Because you are paying off the house and you own anything you've paid for, which is what your mortgage payments are paying for. So because of that, when you sell it, you get to keep that money. Now, Bunch of benefits to owning a home. Let me be very clear on how this works. The bank actually owns your home. When you went and got a loan for the bank, for a $250,000 house, sure, they give you that loan because they know they're getting their money back. And the way they know that is because they actually are the ones that bought the house. You didn't buy the house. The bank bought the house. You are paying the bank every month. If you stop paying the bank will kick you out of their house because they own it, and you don't get any of the money back, any of your equity. You just get kicked out. Then they turn around and sell it, and they keep the money, and then somebody else starts that process over. You don't actually own the house until you pay off your entire mortgage, which could be over 30 years. So bank owned is called foreclosure. When they kick you out and they own the property, that's called a foreclosure. So if you miss your payments, you don't just get evicted and have to go get another rental property. You lose all your equity that's in the house. So here's another drawback. I want to mention this. While usually a mortgage is actually cheaper, depending on your interest rate, it's actually cheaper a lot of times than rent. So you're like, oh, so it's cheaper to be a homeowner. Not necessarily. A lot of times, yes, it's still cheaper per month, but you're kind of stuck in the same place for like 30 years. However, these are expenses that are very common. Utilities, you have to pay that with a rent anyway, but like home improvements, maintenance, changing air filters, something breaks, fridge isn't working, that's all on you. Property taxes, which the landlords pay, and then homeowners insurance. All of these things are rolled into your mortgage that your landlord would be paying if you're in rent, if you're renting it. But usually at the end of the day, it is actually cheaper to own a home per month than it is to rent per month. All right, so what is one benefit and one drawback of owning your home? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, let's talk about some mortgages. So mortgages is basically you go to the bank and the bank says, sure, here's some money. There's a different ways of paying that back, all right? Because you're going to pay interest. Interest is thank you money to the bank. This is how the bank makes money, and the banks have different types of mortgages designed for different ways you want to do this. So the most common type of mortgage to buy for a house, if you're like, hey, I want to live here, raise a family here, you're going to probably get a fixed rate mortgage, all right? It might be 5%, 4%, 6%, depending on whatever the going rate is at that time in the country. What is a fixed rate mortgage? That means, so if you take out, let me give you very specific here on what interest rates mean. Say you take out a loan for $100,000, buying a really small house, $100,000 loan, all right, at 6% interest. 6% of $100,000 is $6,000. That does not mean you will eventually pay back $106,000. That 6% is $6,000 per year in thank you money that you will have to pay back while you're paying back that $100,000. So a $100,000 loan at 6% interest over 30 years ends up being closer to like $270,000. That's why banks give out loans. It's fantastic for them. But people don't have $100,000 in a bank account. This is why they take out loans. This is why the banks are happy to do it. This is why people use them. Fixed rate means your bill is going to be the same today as it will be in 25 years. Even if the rates change for everybody else, when you take a loan out, whatever your mortgage is, say it's $800 this month, 22 years from now, it's going to be $800 a month. Fixed rate mortgage is the exact same year in and year out. So there's another option. It's called an adjustable rate mortgage. This is where you got to get aggressive and know what you're doing. So an adjustable rate mortgage, when you take it out, initially your very first payments are going to be lower because they're going to give you the lowest possible rate. However, adjustable rate mortgage basically say we're going to adjust with the time. So and when I'm recording this, mortgage rates are currently going up. So your mortgage could increase every single year or every single month actually, as opposed to now if the mortgage rates went down, your house payments would go down. But it is usually beneficial because for the short term you're paying less, but you have to deal with market fluctuations. So one of the downsides is you can't really plan far ahead of what your mortgage or your monthly payments will be like in the future. They can go up, they can go down. It's more of a risky move for long-term ownership. A lot of times people use adjustable rate mortgages if they know they're not going to stay at one place for a super long amount of time. And they know they're going to sell the house anyway. So fixed rate is very set. Adjustable rate, it can vary. And the benefits is it is usually cheaper the first 3 or 7 years as you buy a home. But then after that, typically prices will go up. So the question is, explain the benefits of a fixed rate mortgage and the benefit of an ARM mortgage, an adjustable rate mortgage, and who would benefit from each of those. All right, 2 more types of mortgage, and these are less common. These are usually very business savvy people that go in here with a very clear plan. There is one called an interest-only mortgage, meaning they are only paying the thank you money to the bank. And the bank knows this in advance, all right? However, a lot of times this is that they're like, hey, I want to buy this house. Like I just started working at Google. You know, I was making $10,000 a year. Now I'm getting ready to make $1 million a year. And I want to buy this house right now, but I don't have the income right now to pay for this really nice house. So I want to mortgage with only interest early on, all right? Not paying on the principal at all, meaning the actual cost of the house. So while interest-only mortgages are really good for the short term, for the long term, they're one of the worst options that you can have as far as monthly payments. So you see here compared to like a 30-year fixed mortgage and a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage and then a 5-year interest-only mortgage. The problem is after that initial time period you've agreed upon that you're only going to pay for interest only, the prices take off after that because you're having to pay a higher interest rate plus the principal, and it ends up being eventually your monthly payments are exceedingly high. So you're like, who in the world would possibly benefit from that? Again, somebody who is working on a commission or expecting to get paid a whole lot more coming up. The interest-only payments allow you to live in the house that you will eventually be able to afford with only paying a smaller amount early on, but then it gets much, much larger. So the downsides to it is that those cheaper rates are only really for the beginning, and then the interest rate will go up as will you have to pay on the principal. And it also doesn't pay down the loan. You're gaining no equity while you're paying interest only. So the next one, and this one is bonkers. All right, I say that. Balloon mortgages are probably relatively, I've known people to use interest-only mortgages, worked out great for them. And I've actually known of people who use it for watching TV, like people that want to flip houses, to use balloon mortgages. If you are going to sit down and settle down for 30 years and raise a family, you most likely don't want an interest-only or a balloon mortgage. However, what a balloon mortgage is, all right, is that you start out with very small, it's very similar to interest-only payments, all right? You pay a really, really small amount for a couple years, all right? Very, very small, all right? Then, once that time is up, you have to pay the entire total amount that you owe in one lump sum. Like, what? Yeah, it's like 7 years, you're paying like really, really small interest payments, and then boom, that's why it's a balloon. It's all of a sudden it gets really big. That you owe the rest of it. All right, so standard loans, you pay interest, you pay the principal, you pay it off over time, nice and neat and ineffective. Balloon loans, you pay a really small amount, then all of a sudden, boom, you owe it all. Who in the world would use this? I'll tell you who. People who flip houses. You go buy a house for $130,000, you renovate it, all right, takes you a couple years to renovate it, and then you sell it because this is in the area for $500,000, all right? That is the people who use balloon payments, because then when they sell that house for $500,000 because it's super nice and they've renovated it, they spend $130,000 on it, they put another $130,000 into it, so they've spent $260,000 on the house, they just sold it for $500,000, then they have that money to pay off that $260,000 or at least $130,000 in that loan and then move on to their next project. While they're working on that house and they're owning it, they're never planning on living in it. So they have a balloon mortgage where they pay a really small amount for a little bit of time, knowing that they're going to sell it and then they're just going to pay it off anyway. If you were planning on actually living in a house, a balloon mortgage is like the worst possible thing that you could do because unless you're independently wealthy, and there's variables for everybody. I shouldn't be giving financial advice because, as I said yesterday, this is not a one size fits all. But I do want you to give a scenario where someone would prefer a balloon mortgage and a scenario where someone would want an interest-only mortgage. So answer that completely. That's what I got for you guys today. See y'all tomorrow.